I always thought I could save the restaurant if I cooked my mother's dish perfectly. Turns out, the world isn't ruled by recipes. It's ruled by demons in expensive suits. Steam curled up from the pot like a ghost refusing to leave. I lowered the flame and leaned over the broth, letting coriander and charred ginger kiss my face with heat. The room smelled like everything I loved and everything I'd failed to protect. Noon sun cut through the dusty blinds and turned the empty dining room into slanted gold. I could still hear Mom humming in the kitchen, except she'd been gone for 3 months, and I was humming for both of us. "Okay, Lina," I told the broth, because talking to boiling water is only a little strange when you're alone. "Don't embarrass me." The ladle trembled in my hand. Rent notices were rubber-banded to the register like red flags. The landlord's last text still sat on my phone. A blinking dare, final visit today. "Be ready." I plated the noodles and poured the broth the way Mom taught me, slowly. Reverently, like an apology and a promise sharing the same mouth. I added the pickled radish she swore would make angels cry, and the fried shallots that could make devils beg. When I set the bowl on the front table, across from the vacant chair, where she used to do the books, the bell over the door jingled. Not the landlord. Not the bank. Worse. 2 lawyers walked in first, armed with briefcases and cologne. Behind them, the kind of man who made a room colder just by noticing it existed. Tall. Uncomfortably elegant. A suit the color of storms after midnight. He didn't look around so much as weigh the air. "Miss Park," one of the lawyers asked. "I'm Ari from Northbridge Holdings. This is my associate, and this is..." "Orion," the man in the storm suit said. He didn't offer a hand. He offered a presence. "We appreciate you meeting us." "I didn't," I said. My voice came out crisp, like a chip you bite to pretend you're not hungry. He almost smiled. Almost. "Nevertheless, we're here." The lawyers placed papers on the counter. Numbers marched across them like an army I couldn't afford to fight. Words like consolidation, acquisition, asset transfer stabbed at the margins. "This is a family restaurant," I said, even though my family line had snapped the moment Mom exhaled for the last time. Orion glanced at the bowl I'd plated. Steam coiled like a beckoning finger. He moved toward it with the curiosity of a cat and the caution of a surgeon. When he reached for the chopsticks, something low in my stomach bristled. "That's not for you," I blurted. Ari coughed. "Ms. Park, as of this morning, Northbridge Holdings is the controlling owner," Orion finished. He lifted the chopsticks, balanced them in long fingers. "Which makes me, in a practical sense, your harshest critic and your best hope." I wanted to snatch the bowl away. I wanted to throw it at him and watch liquid gold ruin that perfect suit. Instead, I made the choice I always make, to pretend I have leverage when I don't. "Enjoy," I said sweetly. "It bites back." He took a careful mouthful. His eyes shuddered. A stillness moved through him, the kind that happens during first snow or last confessions. He didn't chew so much as listen with his body. The back of my neck prickled. "It's too full of grief," he said softly. He set the chopsticks down like something sacred and dangerous. "The coriander is trying to tell the truth, but the shallots won't let it." The lawyers shifted, confused. I blinked and felt the pinch of tears, fast and traitorous. "It's a soup. All food is a confession," he said. "This one keeps saying I'm sorry while passing the blame." I hated him instantly. I also hated that he was right. "What do you want?" I asked, because this dance had to end before the music swallowed me. "I want what the restaurant wants," he said. "To live?" He nodded at the papers. "You can sign these and walk away with less debt than you arrived with. Or you can sign a different document and stay as head chef. With my resources, your mother's name remains on the menu. Your craft remains yours. But the business learns to breathe." Ari pushed a sleek folder toward me, and my reflection fractured in its plastic cover. My apron was grayer than white, my hair tied back in a knot that said, "I tried." I touched the folder anyway. It was cool as river stone. "What's in it for you?" I asked. "Return on investment," he said. And something infinitely rarer. He looked at the bowl again. The moment stretched, thin as sugar, just before it breaks. "Don't tell me," I said. "You collect restaurants like stamp books." "I collect flavors," he said. "Not tastes. Flavors. The difference is the person that made them." I laughed. It sounded like a cough that changed its mind. "You mean chefs?" He tilted his head. "I mean confessions." The bell over the door jingled again as a neighbor peeked in, saw the suits, and fled. I pictured my mother wiping her hands on a dish towel, giving me that look, that sliced through self-pity like a sharp knife through a ripe tomato. We didn't quit. We reduced. We simmered. We transformed. "I don't work for men who talk like fortune cookies," I said. "Especially rich ones." "Then work with one," he replied. He slid the contract closer. I stared at my name typed in a font so clean it felt accusatory. I thought about the late fees, and the mocking empty tables, and the way my mother said, "Love is seasoning. Invisible until you miss it." "Give me your straight answer," I said, surprising myself. "Not the lawyered one." Orion's gaze caught mine and held. The room hushed the way kitchens do, seconds before a ticket prints. "I can keep this place alive," he said, "but not the way it was. Nostalgia is a poor business plan. You have talent, Miss Park. It deserves oxygen." I didn't move. My pulse tapped against the hollow of my throat, counting out all the times I'd scraped a pan instead of scraping together rent. He picked up the bowl again, but instead of eating, he set it in front of me. "Eat," he said. "Tell me if you taste the apology." My hand shook. I brought the spoon to my mouth, tasted heat and salt and the ache of unsent messages. "It's there," I admitted. The words burned more than the broth. "Then stay," he said. Not quite gentle. Not quite command. "Learn to cook the part that comes after apology." I should have said no. I should have told him to leave and taken my mother's recipe down with the curtains. Instead, I heard myself say, "Head chef?" "Head chef," he confirmed. Ari slid a pen toward me. Its weight surprised me. Heavier than grief. Lighter than pride. I signed where the page told me to sign, and every stroke felt like walking a thin line over an open flame. When I looked up, Orion was studying me with that stormy stillness, the kind that promised thunder in exchange for rain. "Welcome to your kitchen," he said. "My kitchen," I echoed, and the floor tilted, for just a second, like the building had inhaled. Only later would I understand what else I had invited in with that signature, not just new investors, new menus, new rules, but a man who could taste whatever I tried to hide, and a future that would ask me to season love without burning. The ink on my signature hadn't even dried before the storm-suited man made himself at home in my mother's kitchen. He moved with an air that wasn't just confidence but possession, like every knife. Pan and salt jar had bent a knee to him the second the contract left my hands. "From this moment forward," Orion said, his voice measured and unhurried, "this restaurant is part of Northbridge Holdings' culinary division, which means it is mine." I crossed my arms, flour smudging against my elbow. "Funny. I didn't see your name on the sign outside." He glanced at the peeling wood above the door, where Lina Park's kitchen was still painted in fading strokes. His gaze lingered a moment longer than I expected. Then he turned back, face unreadable. "That name remains, for now. But the only way it survives is if you work under my direction." My stomach nodded. "So those are my options? Obedience or exile? Freedom or preservation?" he corrected smoothly. "Walk away, and you keep your pride but lose everything else. Stay, and your mother's legacy breathes again, through you under my wing." I barked out a laugh sharper than the cleaver on the counter. "Your wing? What are you, some culinary guardian angel?" For the first time, his lips twitched into a smile that wasn't corporate. "Not an angel." I hated the way his words hummed in the air, like he'd just said something bigger than the room could hold. The lawyers excused themselves, murmuring about paperwork and schedules. When the door clicked shut, The silence that fell was too intimate for a negotiation. Orion reached for another pot on the stove, one I'd been simmering absent-mindedly while the world crumbled around me. He lifted the lid, inhaled, then spooned out a taste. His eyes shuddered again in that unnerving way. Like he wasn't eating but listening. "This one," he said, "is tangled with anger. The chili isn't balanced, it screams. Whoever you were thinking about when you made this, you hate them more than you admit." The spoon clattered back into the pot. "Excuse me? I'm rarely wrong." He wiped his mouth delicately with a napkin, as though grief and rage were just another spice to note. Food is memory, emotion. Most people don't realize how much of themselves they leave on the plate. My skin prickled. "So you're what, some kind of food psychic? Do you charge extra for fortune-telling with dessert?" He ignored the barb. "You asked what's in it for me. This is it." He tapped the pot. "I feed not on taste, but on what is carried inside it. Joy, sorrow, hope, guilt. They are my currency. They are my hunger." I stared at him, my laugh dying in my throat. He wasn't joking, not even a little. "You're insane. And you're still here." The truth of that settled uncomfortably between us. I should have walked out, slammed the door, let the building collapse into debt and memory. But the thought of Mom's name being scrubbed off the menu hurt worse than any debt collector's call. I tried for sarcasm because sarcasm is armor. "So let me guess. You sit around chewing people's feelings all day? Breakfast of heartbreak, lunch of regret, dinner of... what, self-loathing?" His eyes glinted. "You'd be surprised how often self-loathing is served." I hated that my lips twitched, almost smiling. He stepped closer, voice lowering. "I don't need you to believe me. I only need you to cook. If you do, your mother's legacy remains on these walls. If you don't, the name fades with the paint." The weight of my apron strings pressed against the back of my neck. I thought about Mom wiping her hands on that same apron, saying, "Food is love. Don't let anyone steal it from you." I looked Orion dead in the eye. "I'll stay. But not for you." "Of course not," he said, like he'd been expecting that answer all along. "Stay for her." His gaze lingered on me for a moment too long, as though he could taste the promise on my tongue. And maybe, just maybe, he could. The new kitchen didn't smell like food. It smelled like disinfectant and polished steel, like someone had bottled sterile efficiency and sprayed it into the air vents. Every surface gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Pots hung in perfect military rows, knives lined up like surgical instruments. It was less a kitchen, and more a laboratory where feelings had been outlawed. I tightened the strings of my apron and told myself I belonged here, even if the reflection staring, back from the chrome refrigerator, looked more like a girl who'd wandered into the wrong building. "Hey," one of the line cooks whispered a little too loudly, his breath fogging the gleaming glass. "That's her. The market girl. Market girl. Like I hadn't spent years breaking down bones, tasting stocks blindfolded, or cooking through nights when grief made the spoon too heavy. I clenched my jaw and grabbed a cutting board. If they wanted a market girl, I'd give them one sharp enough to slice their smug grins in half. I set to work dicing onions with a precision my mother would have praised. But the whispers continued, low and poisonous. "She only got in because of him. She won't last a week." "Fine. Let them talk." I plated my first dish under the sterile lights, a broth that should have carried warmth, memory, comfort. I knew it did, because I'd put those things in it. Then he appeared. No footsteps, no warning, just a shadow falling across the station. Orion. Immaculate as always. The storm-suited specter haunting my new reality. He didn't even look at me first. He looked at the bowl. He lifted a spoon, tasted, and let the silence stretch. My heart kicked against my ribs. Then, "Raw fear," he said, as if announcing the weather. "Uncooked. Unseasoned. It lingers bitter on the tongue." The line cooks exchanged confused glances. One smirked. I wanted to throw the pot at his perfect head. "Excuse me?" I said, crossing my arms. You rushed, Orion continued, his voice cool, deliberate. You cooked the broth too hot, too fast. Fear always wants to hurry. The worst part? He was right, and I hated him for it. So I did the only thing I could. I reached for sarcasm. Congratulations. You're not a culinary critic, you're a gastronomic therapist. Should I lie down on a cutting board and tell you about my childhood while you chew on my trauma? For a fraction of a second, his eyes gleamed like I'd actually amused him. Then the expression was gone, tucked neatly back into that infuriating calm. You'll find honesty is a better ingredient, he said simply. I gripped the counter so hard the edges dug into my palms. Around us, the other cooks were pretending to focus on their stations but listening like schoolchildren, eavesdropping on a fight in the hallway. Inside me, irritation simmered to a boil. Who was this man, this demon, to speak like he knew me better than I knew myself? To turn my broth into a confessional, my work into a mirror? But the worst part wasn't that he was wrong. It was that he was too right. And that every time he opened his mouth, I felt as if he'd cracked open a door I'd worked years to keep bolted shut. Fine, I muttered, reaching for a new pot. Next time I'll season it with stubbornness. I hear it pairs well with unsolicited criticism. The line cooks snickered. Orion didn't even blink. He simply leaned closer, just enough that I felt the shadow of his presence stir the tiny hairs on my neck. Do that, he murmured, and I'll taste it instantly. And then he was gone, leaving me staring into my own reflection in the polished steel, wondering why my chest felt tight. Like his words had slipped inside me the way flavor slips into broth, impossible to separate once it's in. The kitchen had quieted after service, leaving only the low hum of refrigeration units and the faint tick of cooling metal. I should have gone home hours ago, but I couldn't tear myself from the stove. Cooking was the only way to silence the buzzing in my head. Buzzing. That sounded suspiciously like Orion's voice dissecting my broth. I was chopping scallions when I sensed him behind me. No footsteps, no door opening, just his presence. Like the room had decided to tilt in his direction. You don't have to stalk me in my own kitchen, I said without looking up. If you wanted more broth, you could just ask. I'm not here for broth. His tone was calm, almost conversational, which somehow made it worse. I'm here because you should know what you signed yourself into. I slammed the knife down harder than necessary. I already know. Corporate slavery with better lighting. When I turned, he was leaning against the counter, hands in his pockets. Every inch the storm I hated looking at but couldn't stop watching. No, he said. Not slavery. Something older. Rarer. I told you, I collect flavors. Right. I crossed my arms. Still sounds like you're a pretentious food critic with a god complex. His eyes held mine, steady, unblinking. I'm a demon, Lina. The knife slipped in my grip, nicking my fingertip. I barely felt the sting. I laughed. Because laughter is armor. Oh, of course. And I suppose the horns are tucked under that perfect haircut. I don't need horns, he said softly. I need taste. He stepped closer, his presence pressing against me like heat from an oven door. I feed on emotions the way others feed on meat or wine. Grief, joy, longing. They season the world. When someone cooks, they bare themselves. I feel it as vividly as you feel salt on your tongue. The hair on my arms lifted. My first instinct was to run, but my second, the more dangerous one, was curiosity. So what? You tasted my fear? My grief? He nodded once. Your broth told me more than your words ever could. It screamed sorrow and loss. You've been cooking apologies, Lina. That's why every bite burns. I swallowed hard, hating that he wasn't wrong. That's insane. Is it? He gestured toward the pan in front of me. Cook something else. Something that isn't sorrow. Against my better judgment, I obeyed. My hands moved automatically, rice, egg, sesame oil. I tried to think of happiness, childhood festivals, afternoons when Mom let me lick batter from the spoon. I forced the memory, smiling until my cheeks ached. When the dish was done, I slid it toward him with false cheer. "There," I said. "Pure joy. Sunshine on a plate." Orion tasted it slowly, eyes half closed. Then he set the spoon down and gave me a look sharp enough to slice bone. "Lies," he said. "Forced. Like painting a smile on a corpse." Heat rushed to my face. "Excuse me? You tried to fabricate joy. But your hands don't lie. They still carry grief, exhaustion, doubt." I tasted the mask and the truth beneath it. I wanted to yell at him, throw the pan across the room, anything to break that impossible certainty in his voice. Instead, I found myself leaning closer, caught by the gravity of someone who saw me too clearly. "You think you know me because you can, what, eat my feelings?" My voice trembled with anger and something I refused to name. "I don't think," he murmured. "I know." The space between us thinned to nothing. His breath was warm with sesame and spice, his gaze locked on mine as if daring me to blink. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my fingertips. For a second, the air itself leaned forward, urging us toward a kiss I hadn't asked for, but suddenly couldn't stop imagining. Then the clatter of trays crashed from the dining room, shattering the moment. I jerked back, nearly knocking over the pan. Orion straightened, composure sliding back into place like armor. "We'll continue another time." I busied myself with wiping the counter, refusing to meet his eyes. "Don't hold your breath." But as he left, the echo of his words clung to me like steam, inescapable, heavy, and terrifyingly true. The kitchen was too loud, too bright, too sharp. Pans hissed, knives clattered, voices overlapped into a chorus of nerves. Tonight wasn't just another service. Tonight a renowned food critic was dining with us. His reviews could crown or crush careers. I had spent days perfecting my mother's braised short ribs with black garlic glaze. The one recipe that felt like her handwriting on my hands. It was my ace, my proof that I belonged here. But when I went to check the prep station, my stomach dropped. The ribs were already on the pass, perfectly plated, drizzled with the glaze I'd guarded like a secret. And they weren't mine. Across the line, one of the junior chefs, Park Jin, all smug grin and slicked back hair, was sliding the plates toward the servers like they belonged to him. "That's my dish," I snapped, voice slicing through the clamor. Jin raised his brows, feigning innocence. "Recipes don't belong to anyone. It's all about execution, right?" Anger flared hot enough to burn my throat. "You stole it. You went through my notes?" He shrugged, lips curling. "Then prove it wasn't yours to begin with." The servers were already carrying the plates out to the critic's table. I wanted to scream, to drag him out by his apron strings, but fury wasn't evidence. It was just noise. And Orion hated noise. I felt him before I saw him. He appeared beside me like a shadow pulled into form, his gaze cool and assessing. "What's the problem?" "Jin stole my recipe," I hissed. "Those ribs, those are mine." Orion's eyes flicked toward the dining room. "Do you have proof?" My throat worked uselessly. "No, but..." "Then don't waste breath." His voice cut clean through me, cold as a blade. Then, softer, dangerous in its certainty, "Prove it on the plate." "Let the food speak." I froze, my hands trembling. The critic was already tasting Jin's version. If I cooked now, the whole kitchen would know I was challenging him. If I failed, if my dish fell flat, I'd be nothing more than the market girl they already thought I was. But Mom's voice rose in my chest, steady as ever. "Food is love. It doesn't lie." I grabbed a fresh rack of ribs. My knife moved fast, not from panic, but purpose. Garlic cracked beneath the blade. Ginger hissed in oil, soy, and sugar caramelized into a glaze that clung like memory. I didn't rush. I didn't fake. Every motion poured with the grief and grit I'd been carrying since the funeral. When the ribs hit the plate, the aroma bloomed, rich and deep. I carried the dish out myself, ignoring Jin's glare. The critic looked up, startled, but I set the plate down with a bow I barely remembered from my mother's lessons. "This is the original," I said. My voice didn't shake. "Please try it." He tasted one bite, then another. His brows drew together, not in displeasure but focus. "Remarkable," he murmured. The other plate was competent. "This one is alive." Alive. The word sank into me like sunlight after weeks of rain. Jin went pale, his smirk collapsing. The rest of the staff stared in silence. From the corner of the room, Orion watched, arms folded. For once, his expression wasn't mocking or cold. It was intent, sharp, and, dare I say it, proud. As the critic praised the dish, I caught Orion's gaze. He inclined his head just slightly, as if to say, "I told you." The food would speak. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. For all his arrogance, his impossible insight, his infuriating critiques, he hadn't set me up to fail. For the first time, Orion wasn't just my harshest critic. He was on my side. The dinner rush was easing into its last hour, the dining room buzzing with the warm hum of satisfied patrons. I'd just plated a dish of glazed eggplant when the bell over the door chimed. I looked up and nearly dropped the pan. "Ye Jin." My cousin swept in as though the restaurant floor was a red carpet. Her, heels clicking, her designer bag perched like a trophy on her arm. She hadn't been around for Mom's funeral. She hadn't lifted a finger when I was drowning in debt. But now, when the restaurant finally breathed again, she was here. Lina. Her voice carried across the room, sharp enough to turn heads. "So it's true. You sold her memory." I felt the air drain from my chest. "What are you doing here?" "I came for what's mine." She took in the decor, the neatly dressed servers, the polished menu in her hand. Her smile was poison. Aunt Un's legacy, our family's restaurant. Unless, of course, you've already signed it away to him. Her chin jerked toward the shadow moving from the far end of the dining room. Orion. He approached like a storm front, smooth and inevitable, hands tucked into his suit pockets. "Bold words for someone who contributed nothing," he said, voice calm but carrying weight. "Lina has kept this place alive. You? You watched from the sidelines." A murmur rippled through the diners. Some leaned in, others pretended not to listen, but kept their forks frozen halfway. Hyejin's smile tightened. "And you're what, exactly? A savior?" "No, you're a parasite. You bought a memory and dressed it up for profit. And, Lina?" She turned on me, her voice sharpening into accusation. "You let him. You let a stranger, worse, a monster, own what your mother built." The word monster cracked something in me, because she wasn't entirely wrong. Orion wasn't human, not in any way I could rationalize. But he was the reason the doors stayed open. The reason my mother's recipes still had a place in this city. Before I could answer, Orion stepped closer, placing himself between us, his shadow brushing against mine. "She didn't sell anything," he said, his tone edged like a blade. "She chose survival. She chose me." My blood went hot. The way he said it, like I belonged to him, like my choices were his to frame, ignited a fury I hadn't known I still had energy for. "I didn't choose you," I snapped, shoving past him so the entire room could hear. "I chose this restaurant. I chose my mother's name." Orion's gaze flicked to mine, unreadable, but the damage was done. The diners whispered louder now, caught between scandal and curiosity. Hyejin smirked. "See? Even she admits it. You've chained yourself to him, Lina, and one day you'll realize he only keeps what he can consume." The word sliced deeper than I wanted to admit, because I'd seen the truth in Orion's eyes, his hunger for emotions, his need to taste what couldn't be bought. And if I wasn't careful, I could become just another dish to him. My fists clenched. "You don't get to come in here and play family after months of silence. You don't get to claim what you abandoned." My voice cracked, but held steady. "You're not my family, Hyejin. And you—" I turned to Orion, the fury rising again. You're not either. And you never will be. The silence that followed rang louder than the clatter of pans. Diners glanced nervously at one another, unsure whether to applaud or flee. Hyejin, satisfied at the chaos she'd stirred, lifted her chin and strode out as if she'd won something. When the door shut, Orion remained beside me, still as stone. His voice, when it came, was quiet but unyielding. I was defending you. Don't. I bit the word off before it could shake. Don't defend me like I'm yours to claim. His eyes searched mine, storm gray and endless. And yet, he said softly, you didn't deny that I keep this place alive. The truth lodged in my throat like a bone I couldn't swallow. He was right. I hated him for being right. Because I needed his support, and yet every time he offered it, it felt less like protection and more like control tightening around my ribs. I turned away, retreating to the stove where the eggplant was burning. The smell filled the room, sharp and bitter, exactly like the taste left in my mouth. It started with whispers, as most poison does. A critic here, a supplier there, a sly smile, a lowered voice, a rumor sharp enough to cut deeper than any knife. Lina Park? She's not a chef. She's a puppet. Her talent? A myth fed to her by the demon who owns her. She doesn't cook. He makes her taste like magic. By the time the words reached me, they were already wildfire. My reputation, fragile, barely earned, was being burned alive. The source was easy enough to trace, Chef Han, a rival restaurateur who had been circling like a vulture ever since Orion's acquisition of my family's place. He was older, established, his restaurants lined with awards, and he'd decided the easiest way to weaken Orion's empire was to gut me first. I tried to ignore it, but the sting clung to my skin. Every diner's curious glance felt like suspicion. Every question about our new partnership sounded like mockery. So I worked. Harder. Longer. If they wanted proof of my talent, I'd drown them in it. Days blurred into nights. My hands blistered from endless chopping. My eyes burned from smoke and sleeplessness. I cooked until the kitchen lights flickered like stars about to die. Until the hum of the refrigerators was the only heartbeat I heard. That was where Orion found me. I'd curled up on the bags of rice in the storeroom, too exhausted to make it home. My apron balled beneath my head. The grains shifted under me, a lumpy mattress, but I didn't care. Sleep claimed me fast and deep, the kind that only grief and exhaustion can brew. I stirred awake at the sound of fabric sliding over me. Something heavy and warm settled across my shoulders. My eyes blinked open. Orion's suit jacket, dark as midnight, cocooned me in unexpected comfort. I froze. He stood nearby, leaning against a shelf, arms crossed. Watching. Guarding. Go back to sleep, he said quietly, without his usual edge. I pushed up on my elbows, blinking at him. Why are you... My throat cracked. This isn't your job. It is, he said simply. You burn yourself out. You lose the flavor that makes you different. I won't allow it. I let out a tired laugh. So, this is quality control? Cover the product so it doesn't spoil? The corner of his mouth almost curved. If that's the way you need to see it. But there was something in his eyes, still storm gray, still unreadable, that made me think it wasn't about control, not tonight. It was about something softer, quieter. For the first time, he didn't criticize. He didn't dissect my broth or my emotions. He just stayed. A silent sentinel in the glow of the storeroom light, letting me rest. I pulled his jacket tighter around me, the faint scent of cedar and smoke clinging to the fabric. It should have felt suffocating, like another one of his chains. But instead, it felt like a shield. I hated that my chest ached with gratitude. I hated that the coldest man I'd ever met could show me more kindness in silence than others had with words. As my eyes slid shut again, I told myself I'd remember this moment as weakness. His, mine, both. But part of me knew the truth. Betrayal wasn't just what others said about me. It was how easily my heart betrayed me, beating faster under the weight of a demon's coat. The kitchen was a battlefield. Pans crashed, knives clattered, orders flew like arrows. Tonight's private tasting would determine if Northbridge's investors expanded Orion's empire or gutted it. And somehow, all of it balanced on the food that came out of my station. I stirred the reduction until my arm ached, plating with one hand while barking at a junior chef with the other. My pulse raced faster than the ticket printer. Then a voice slid through the chaos like ice on fire. Too heavy on the soy. It hides the bitterness you don't want anyone to notice. Orion, standing there, immaculate, untouched by the storm around him. I snapped before I thought. If you don't like it, maybe pick up a pan instead of standing there being decorative. His gaze was sharp, unyielding. You don't want me to cook, Lina. You want me to watch, to push. Otherwise you drown. The nerve of him, the absolute gall. I shoved the pan onto the counter harder than necessary. Push? All you do is control and mock. You act like every dish is a therapy session I didn't ask for. Because you're hiding, he said simply. Even now. You cook like you're begging for approval instead of owning the plate. My breath caught, furious. He always knew how to find the bruise and press. You don't own me, I hissed. And you don't get to psychoanalyze me like one of your ingredients. A junior chef rushed by with trays of garnish, nearly colliding into me. Orion grabbed my arm, steadying me before I could fall. His hand was firm, too warm, far too close. Pantry, he ordered under his breath, steering me toward the door before the others could hear the argument escalating. I yanked free but followed, slamming the door behind us. The cramped space pressed with the scent of dried herbs and cool stone walls. Do you enjoy humiliating me in front of everyone? I demanded. His voice was quiet but cutting. Do you enjoy sabotaging yourself? Because that's what you're doing every time you pretend you're less than you are. I glared at him, chest rising and falling too fast. You think you know me because you taste my food. But you don't. You don't know what it costs to still be standing here. Something shifted in his eyes, something unguarded, dangerous. Then, show me, he murmured. Stop hiding. The silence between us stretched, taut and electric. My pulse thundered in my ears. His face was too close, his breath brushing my cheek, scented faintly of smoke and cedar. I should have walked out. I should have shoved him away. Instead, I leaned in. No, we both did. The distance vanished. His mouth crashed into mine, fierce and hungry, tasting of everything we'd been choking back: fury, grief, need. My hands fisted in his jacket before I realized they'd moved. His fingers pressed into the small of my back, pulling me closer. The kiss was fire and storm, wrong in every way and yet more honest than anything we'd said aloud. And then, as suddenly as it began, we broke apart, gasping. This? I stammered, voice shaking. This was a mistake. Agreed, Orion said, though his voice was rougher than usual, his pupils blown wide. We both turned away, pretending to busy ourselves with nothing, but the air between us stayed charged, thick enough to choke. When I finally dared to glance at him, his gaze caught mine. No words, just a storm I couldn't look away from. A storm that promised whatever this was, it wasn't over. The tasting was supposed to be flawless. Every ingredient ordered, every garnish timed, every plate perfect. Investors weren't critics, they were sharks. One bad bite, and they'd smell blood in the water. But when the delivery truck arrived that morning, I knew something was wrong. The boxes of seafood were warm. The produce was wilted, bruised, useless. My hands shook as I rifled through crate after crate. All of it spoiled. Chef Han. It had to be. The man had been circling us for weeks, spreading whispers, dropping poison into ears. Now he'd gone further. He'd bought off our supplier, knowing one ruined shipment could sink the night. By 6 o'clock, panic had seeped through the kitchen. My team whispered about canceling. Even the investors waiting outside looked restless, tapping their expensive watches, already imagining headlines about Orion's empire slipping. I wanted to scream, to throw the ruined crates through the wall, to cry until the grief drowned me. But my mother's voice rose up, steady as a heartbeat. Food is love, Lina. It doesn't need wealth to shine. Sometimes the humblest plate carries the loudest truth. I inhaled, exhaled, and turned to the scraps. There were a few handfuls of rice, some wilted herbs, a half bag of mushrooms too ugly for fine dining but still fragrant when seared, garlic, onion, bones for broth, nothing glamorous. Nothing that screamed Michelin star, but enough. Enough if I cooked with my heart instead of my fear. Clear the stations, I barked. My voice cracked but held. We're making something different. The line cooks blinked. One whispered, "From scraps?" "Yes," I snapped. "From scraps." I lit the burner, poured oil, and let the sizzle wake something fierce inside me. Garlic hit the pan, releasing a scent that cut through the despair like sunlight through storm clouds. Mushrooms caramelized, herbs revived in heat. The broth simmered low and deep, coaxing flavor from bones others would have discarded. I wasn't chasing luxury anymore. I was chasing memory. Mom's late-night suppers when money was thin, bowls eaten on doorsteps, laughter carrying further than hunger, dishes born not of plenty, but of love. By the time I plated, silence had fallen in the kitchen. No chaos, no fear, just the smell of something honest filling the air. I carried the bowls out myself. The investors looked at the humble offering, nothing gleaming, nothing adorned, and raised skeptical brows. "It isn't what we planned," I admitted, voice steady. "But it's real. Please, taste." The first spoon clinked, then another. Then the silence deepened, the kind that meant palates were too busy to talk. One man, his suit worth more than my apartment, leaned forward. "What is this?" His tone was bewildered, not offended. "Comfort," I said quietly. "Resilience. Hope." He took another bite, slower this time, reverent. "I've eaten at the best restaurants in Paris, Milan, Tokyo. None of them gave me this." His gaze sharpened. "None of them gave me honesty." Murmurs spread, approval building like a rising tide. "Remarkable. Unexpected. We've never tasted anything like it." I felt my lungs finally expand. Relief poured through me so strong it almost toppled me. At the edge of the room, Orion stood in shadow, as always. But his face wasn't shadowed at all. His eyes burned, silver gray catching light in a way I'd never seen before. He wasn't looking at the investors. He wasn't even looking at the food. He was looking at me, not like a critic, not like a collector of flavors dissecting a specimen, but like a man who had just tasted life for the first time and realized he'd been starving until now. Our gazes locked. For once, he didn't say a word. And that silence said everything. The restaurant had finally gone quiet. Chairs stacked, lights dimmed, the air still humming faintly with the ghosts of conversation and clinking glasses. I sat alone at the counter, fingers wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. My body ached, but the adrenaline of the night hadn't let me go. The tasting was over. Against every odd, I'd pulled us back from disaster. The investors had left murmuring approval, some even excitement. For the first time in months, I'd felt like I wasn't failing my mother's name. A soft sound broke the silence. Orion. He stood by the doorway, jacket slung over one arm, tie loosened. For once, he didn't look like the immaculate storm that always seemed 2 steps ahead. He looked tired, almost human. "You should rest," I said, my voice hoarse. He walked closer, the shadows moving with him. "I've rested for centuries, Lina. Tonight is the first time I've felt awake." I frowned. "Awake?" He leaned against the counter across from me, studying my face as though it held the answer to a question he hadn't dared ask before. "For hundreds of years, I've tasted everything people hide in their food. Regret, pride, envy, grief. It all passes through me, flavorless in its repetition, empty. Until now." His words landed heavy in my chest. "Until me?" "Until your dishes." His tone was low, steady, but there was something raw beneath it. Do you know what it is to eat and never feel full? To consume joy, sorrow, love, yet never experience them as your own. That is my curse. My hunger. He paused, gaze lowering for the first time since I'd met him. But tonight, with that bowl you made from scraps, I didn't just taste you. I felt, and it terrified me. The honesty in his voice stripped me bare. Gone was the cold critic who dissected my cooking. Standing before me was a man haunted by centuries of emptiness. A demon, yes, but also a prisoner of his own hunger. I swallowed hard. My instinct was to fight, to mock, to build a wall of sarcasm. But something softer pushed through instead. "You're not just my critic," I said quietly. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. "You're my ally. My partner." His eyes lifted, storm gray locking onto mine with a force that made the air between us crackle. Something shifted there, unspoken but undeniable. Not salvation, not romance, not yet, but recognition. "You don't understand what you've done," he murmured. "Maybe not." I set the empty teacup down and leaned forward, just enough that our faces were caught in the same fragile space. "But maybe you don't either." The silence swelled, thick with everything we weren't saying. His hand twitched on the counter, like he wanted to reach for me but wasn't sure if he dared. My breath caught, the distance between us charged, dangerous, magnetic. For a fleeting moment, it felt inevitable. That he would close the space, that I would let him. But instead he exhaled, long and controlled, and pulled back just slightly. His armor slid back into place, but not fully. Never fully again. "Sleep, Lina," he said softly, his voice almost gentle. "Tomorrow, the world will demand more of us both." I watched him go, the storm of him lingering even after the door shut. My chest ached, not from exhaustion, but from the impossible truth. For the first time, I didn't see him only as a demon. I saw him as a man who had finally confessed, not just to me, but to himself. The decision wasn't sudden. It grew slowly, like dough rising in the dark. Quiet, inevitable. By the time the investors had signed off on the expansion, I already knew I didn't want it. Not their money, not their strings, not the suffocating shadow of Northbridge Holdings. And, to my surprise, Orion agreed. "We've proven what we can do," he'd said one night, voice as even as always, though there was an undercurrent of something freer. "Now, we do it on our own." The weeks that followed moved like a whirlwind. My cousin Hyejin stopped calling when the lawyers reminded her of the papers she'd already signed. Chef Han's smear campaign collapsed after a critic exposed his bribes. Jin, the colleague who had stolen my recipe, was quietly dismissed. Orion's order, though he claimed it was just good business. And me? For the first time, I wasn't fighting to keep someone else's restaurant alive. I was building mine. Ours. The new space was small, tucked into a side street lined with trees that dropped blossoms on the sidewalk each spring. The walls were painted warm cream, the tables mismatched but polished. The kitchen wasn't a laboratory of chrome and steel. It was alive, messy in the right places, humming with the rhythm of real cooking. On opening night, the sign above the door gleamed in the lamplight, "Founded by Lina and Orion." I stood under it with my apron tied too tight, nerves fluttering in my chest. "And it feels surreal," I admitted, brushing flour from my hands. Orion stood beside me, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled up. For once, he looked less like a storm in a boardroom, and more like a man ready to roll up his hands in flour. His gaze lingered on the sign, then on me. Surreal is the right word, but fitting. The first customers trickled in. Neighbors, curious passers-by, a few loyal patrons from my mother's old place. Laughter filled the dining room, and the smells of simmering broth and sizzling garlic wrapped around me like a second skin. In the kitchen, I plated our very first dessert, a simple custard with caramel drizzle. My hands trembled as I set it before Orion. "Well? Try it. Officially, you're the first." He picked up the spoon, elegant as ever. but there was something playful flickering in his eyes. He took a bite, let the silence draw out until I thought I'd faint. Then his lips curved into that infuriating, almost smile. "Too sweet," he said smoothly. "Were you thinking about me?" Heat flared across my cheeks, traitorous and impossible to hide. "What? No, absolutely not." The corner of his mouth lifted higher. Then perhaps you should taste it again, just to be sure." I snatched the spoon from him, scowling, but when I tasted the custard myself, my pulse betrayed me all over again. Sweetness lingered on my tongue, warmth curling in my chest. For once, I didn't argue. The night blurred into laughter, plates clattering, the doorbell chiming as more people came than we'd dared hope for. By the end of service, exhaustion tugged at my bones, but joy hummed stronger than fatigue. When the last guest left and the lights dimmed, I stepped outside, the cool air brushing my skin. Orion followed, standing quietly beside me under the glow of our sign. "This is just the beginning," he said. I looked at him, at the storm and the man, at the critic and the unlikely ally who had become something more. My chest swelled with a feeling I hadn't tasted in years. "Hope, yes," I whispered. "The beginning," and for the first time, I let myself believe it.